Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Of course we know that the pension isn't a welfare payment. The pension is a payment that goes to hard-working Australians. Australians who have spent their entire lives often in jobs that aren't high-paying, in jobs that are physically demanding, in jobs that mean they haven't been the Australians that have been able to invest in 3 or 4 or 5 investment properties, in jobs that mean these Australians have toiled day after day to earn enough money to bring up their children to try to give them a better opportunity in life than they had. These are the Australians that are on the age pension. These are the Australians that deserve a government, that deserve members of parliament who are always on their side. And it is fundamentally disappointing that they don't have such a government right now. This legislation is needed, and it's supported by Labor because we understand that there are Australian pensioners who are stuck overseas because of the pandemic, because the borders rightly had to be shut, but because this government, this Morrison government, has fundamentally failed in the vaccination rollout, in building fit-for-purpose national quarantine, and in the Prime Minister's promise to bring all Australians who wanted to come home by Christmas of last year. So it's with no joy that we rise to have to support legislation to support Australian pensioners, many of whom have been failed by the government's botched response to its fundamental duties to Australians during this pandemic: the vaccine rollout, the quarantine, and the fact that if you're an Australian citizen with an Australian passport, that should mean something. That should mean that when you are stranded in another country, your government does everything in its power to get you home, which is not what this government has done. And we know that this government, over the long 8 years, it likes to pretend, by the way, that somehow this is a government that is new and fresh and isn't to blame for things that happened over the last 8 years. It's not a new and fresh government. It's been in power for 8 long years, and we know that over those years, this government has tried time and time again to attack Australia's age pensioners, to cut their pension. Last time Labor was in government, we increased the age pension by $30 a week. We understand working Australians, and we understand their needs in retirement. This is a government that understands the words working Australians because it likes to use them, but it doesn't understand their needs, and it certainly doesn't understand their needs in retirement. If it did, it wouldn't have needed the opposition to catch the government out last year on the pension freeze for 2.5 million pensioners. It wouldn't have needed the opposition and community members and pensioners themselves to raise their voices time and time again to fight against this government's pension freeze. You know, a freeze that took effect in September, and pensioners who had to wait for the October budget before knowing whether they were going to get any kind of relief. And then the relief in the form of the 2 one-off payments, whilst better than nothing, led to so many members of my community contacting me to say, this feels like a slap in the face. This feels like a token amount of money to shut us up, because they realised that there was a political problem because they weren't supporting 2.5 million hard-working Australians who deserve a retirement in dignity. And of course we know that this is a government that in the end views people who receive support from the government, be it unemployment benefits, be it the disability support pension, be it single parent pensions, being it the age pension, as people who are welfare recipients, as the leaners, not the lifters, as the people that they look down on and say, well, we're here to help you from above, but not the people that they live with and understand and really are there to help. And how do we know this? We know this because this is a government that introduced a cashless welfare card for some of the most disadvantaged people in our community, because this government thinks it knows better than Australians about how to spend their money. How do we know that this is a government that wants to control how hard-working Australians in their retirement spend their pensions? We know it not because Labor says it. We know it because the minister responsible for the aged care pension, for social services, said it herself. Last year, the responsible minister was interviewed by the media and asked, are you going to roll out the cashless welfare card nationally? And her answer was that this is a conversation we need to have about the card. Her answer was, well, initially we thought it was to, control people's gambling and whether or not they could drink alcohol and whether or not they could smoke. But now we know apparently it's a wonderful budgeting tool for those people who are on low incomes. A budgeting tool enforced upon them by the government whether they like it or not. And we know that this government's plan, if they ever get the opportunity, is to roll out the cashless welfare card to pensioners across this country, because the responsible minister said, and I quote, a broader application for the whole community. So every time you hear members of my community, this government trying to say that any suggestion that they want to roll out the cashless welfare card to pensioners is nothing but a scare campaign, you remember that the responsible minister talked about this card and its use and the conversation about its use being something that would have a broader application for the whole community because it's a universal platform. And on behalf of my community, where 1 in 5 people are on a pension, 1 in 5 people, disability support, age pension, single parent pension, I asked the minister in this very chamber on the 7th of December last year, not so long ago, the 7th of December last year, I put this challenge to the minister. Will the minister say once and for all that it is not this government's intention to tell people on pensions, family tax benefits, single mother supports, carers pensions and disability support pensions how they can and can't spend their money? The minister didn't respond. Not only did the minister not rule it out, the minister couldn't find words to respond, or any minister representing the minister find any words to respond. Because that's their plan. Because we know that this is a government that's spoken to the big 4 banks and given them money in order to have a task force to set up the technology. They've spoken to supermarkets, they've spoken to Australia Post about the technology and about their plan to extend the draconian legislation. As I said on the 7th of December, will the minister stand up in this place today and rule out extending the cashless welfare card to other recipients of government allowances? And the answer was resounding silence, because the answer is yes. And I can tell you this, members of my community and Australians across this nation, a federal Labor government would scrap the cashless welfare card, and I will not give up fighting against these plans to extend it to age pensioners, because I'm on your side, because Labor is on your side. And we all know whose side this government's on, and it's not yours. The final issue I just want to raise before I finish my contribution in terms of pensions and portability is that there is clearly an emerging issue for Australians or Australian residents who are also Irish citizens and who receive part of a pension via the Irish system and part via the Australian system. I've had two couples contact me and my office, Thomas and Ursula, and Michael and Joan, who since the UK left the European Union are finding that their Irish pension is now subject to significant bank charges every month. You know, it's so significant, in fact, that when you look at Michael and Joan, they're effectively losing half of one of their pensions every year because of these bank charges. And the investigations that my office have undertaken is that it's a result of Brexit. It's a result of banking now being done through the European Union and charges being levied, but no one knows whether they're being levied by European or Irish banks or Australian banks. But they are now losing significant amounts of their pensions. It's a serious issue that if it's affecting Irish Australians in my electorate, it's affecting Irish Australians across the country, and it's one that this government should be looking at and looking at immediately, because again, these are hard-working Australians who are living on low income via pensions, and they cannot afford to lose even $10 a month through bank fees.